Guys, nothing like having technical issues when your partner in crime's not here, and producer Tara and I are trying to figure it all out. So I'm going to give everybody just a couple of seconds to jump over from the stream it's supposed to be on. Um, so we will do that. I hope everybody is staying warm while we deal with all of these technical issues. The one thing that doing things live like this means we have to go with the flow. So that is what we are doing. I am sitting here also trying to get everything going on the back end on my end. And see if we can get it all going. Okay, I am going to assume it looks like we are up and going. Captain's here, so that means we are somewhat back. So I appreciate it, everybody. And welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for your patience and welcome back to True Crime and Wine Time. For those of you that are new here, I'm Terry True Crime, and tonight I'm riding solo as my partner in crime, JT, is somewhere in the middle of the ocean on a cruise with his beautiful bride of 10 years celebrating their anniversary. He did promise me that there will be no crimes that happen on the cruise ship, so I don't need to go and take care of him. He's not going to do anything crazy. And he also promised me he wouldn't jump overboard. So, guys, tonight we are honored to have a very special guest with us, Brian Joseph, the investigative journalist and author behind the explosive book, Vegas Concierge, Sex Trafficking, Hip Hop, and Corruption in America. Hey, Brian, how are
For having
you?
me. I'm very good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for your patience with technology. It always seems to happen when our tech guy is not around.
No
So
problem. Technology is frustrating, and it happens to all of us.
it does. And then I think back to the times when it's complicated. I'm like, yeah, we didn't have this back in the day. So it's better than it used to be, right?
Absolutely.
Well, before we get started into talking about your book, I want to let everyone know today I am drinking a textbook cab from Paseo Robles, California. And I recently discovered this wine after a friend gave me a bottle on New Year's Eve. And now I've bought several more and added to my collection because it is a smooth but very bold wine. And to me, it tastes like black cherry and milk chocolate. So, wine, chocolate, can't say anything's wrong with that. What are you drinking, Brian?
Well, I can't claim to be much of a wine connoisseur. This is literally the only bottle we had at home. It is it's a Chateau de Lide. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a Bordeaux style
Oh,
red
yes.
blend. I had to look that up in order to be able to talk about it intelligently. Like I said, it's the only wine we had in the house. Uh, I just had my first sip now.
Is it pretty good?
It's rich like any Bordeaux, and it's good. Absolutely.
You're gonna have a furry tongue after a Bordeaux. Bordeaux's always make my tongue feel like it swelled 3 sizes. So, I want to first of all say thank you for joining us, and as I told you, before we started the show tonight, I mean, your book is just great. It's very eye-opening, but I wanna thank you for your fearless work in exposing the dark realities that I think so many people turn a blind eye to because it's an uncomfortable topic. And with the challenges you faced in writing the book, I want to say thank you because that takes a lot of courage.
Oh well, thank you. It was an issue once I became aware of that I felt like I couldn't turn away from, and I really just felt propelled until we reached publication.
Yeah, and I mean, I've enjoyed reading your book. I'm reading it a third time. I do that with books that I like because I learn that I learn new things each time when I read it. And after living in Vegas for 4 years, like I told you, I mean, I didn't know that that happened there. I mean, I know it happens everywhere, but I didn't know it was such a thing in Las Vegas, and I guess I thought that because it's so close to Pahrump where they have it legal. So I didn't think because sex work was legal so close, I just assumed that you wouldn't have to have issues in Vegas with it. And guess what? I was wrong, like I am a lot of times. So, I wanna say thank you for the courage, to write the book.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Now, in the book Vegas Concierge, Brian, he peels back the curtain on a shadowy intersection of power, exploitation, and the entertainment world, and specifically how Las Vegas, which is known for its glitz, its glamour, hides much darker stuff than what most of us know about. And tonight with Brian, we're going to talk about what he uncovered, the survivors he met, the systems that failed them, and the powerful forces protecting these criminal networks. And we're also going to explore how the hip hop industry intersects with this underworld and what needs to change to finally bring justice to the victims. So I want to just tell everybody pour your favorite wine, cocktail, glass of water, whatever, settle in and get ready for a very raw, eye opening conversation that reminds us why shining a light on the darkest corners of society is so important. I also want to let everyone know we will be talking about some things that are very uncomfortable. We're not going to get into detail, but if sex trafficking, sex abuse, um, any type of abuse is triggering to you, you might want to skip this episode and come back to see us next week. No hard feelings because it's a dark side, but it's also reality. So, first thing I want to know, in your book, you do tell us about how you arrived in Las Vegas. But for those who haven't read the book, can you tell us how and why you moved to Las Vegas? Because if you were like me, you didn't have on your places I want to live. I don't think Las Vegas was probably the top of your list, was it?
No, no, it certainly it wasn't. I don't think I think it's safe to say it wasn't on our radar at all. Uh, about I don't know exactly how many months, but it was months before we moved to Vegas. My wife and I had our one and only daughter, our one and only child, I should say. And I was working for a small news organization at the time. My wife was working in a job she didn't particularly like. She, really wanted to be home with our daughter, understandably so. So I was looking around for work, and sort of out of the blue, I was recruited by the newspaper in Las Vegas to come and join a newly launched investigative team.
Now, I don't know if you want to get into it, but in the book, you did share a little bit about why you weren't necessarily jumping excitedly when you got reached out to by the newspaper.
I'd say read the book for that.
Okay.
I'd prefer not to get into that too much.
Okay. Uh, just like I think people, if you don't know a lot about Las Vegas, there's two big newspapers there. And it's just kind of interesting that they are different. But what inspired you to write Vegas Concierge? And how did you first become involved in investigating the intersection of sex trafficking, hip hop, and corruption? Like, how did you find yourself in that world?
Well, the hip hop and corruption came much later on in my research. It really, pardon me, I'm getting over a flu we had about 3 weeks ago, so I'm still coughing a bit. Um,
It's that time of year.
it is definitely. So where this really began was with an editor mentioning to me that, if I had previously done some reporting on foster care, and if I had done some reporting on foster care, perhaps I'd be interested in reporting on sex trafficking, and I saw some similarities between foster care and sex trafficking very broadly. Marginalized populations that policymakers don't think a great deal about, that's what really sort of led me into that topic matter. To begin with, um, I I quickly learned that some of the strategies and issues that I faced in reporting on foster care were not quite the same as reporting on domestic sex trafficking. But I generally like stories that are rooted on people and in trying to in stories that try to help folks. And so that's really what sort of propelled me initially into that research. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, I just became more and more horrified with the things that I was learning, and came to really view victims and survivors of sex trafficking as among the most marginalized people in America. And there sort of came to a point where it was like, I can't stop reporting on this. I can't stop working on this until it sees the light of day.
Now, during your research, was there anything that you found that was particularly shocking or difficult to process? Because I imagine, like you said, it was horrifying. I'm sure there was a lot of it, but was there one thing that was just hard?
I mean, I don't know if this was the hardest thing that I mean, I processed and had to encountered a lot of things that were difficult. But I think one of the early sort of realizations that I had was that victims and survivors of sex trafficking typically are victims of something else that happened earlier in their life,
Mhm,
some traumatic event. Uh, Maybe they had a brother that was killed, or a father who was abusive, something like that. And that traumatic event then, affected their self-esteem,
mhm,
affected their soul, for lack of a better term, and then
mhm,
made them vulnerable to the exploitation of a trafficker, of a pimp. And so that dynamic alone is horrifying. We're talking about people who typically are doubly victimized. They had an
mhm,
early victimization, and then their trafficking experience was victimized. That alone is horrifying. But then to realize that when they're out of that lifestyle, and seeking to get justice, or seeking to move on with their life, that they're then marginalized in our society
mhm,
because people dismiss them as immoral women, or bad
mhm,
people. And so to me, that just struck me as like a triple victimization of people.
mhm.
And sort of realizing those three things, and then going, this isn't a major policy priority for really anybody that I'm aware of in
Right.
American politics. Um, that to me was just morally repugnant, and something
Mhm.
that just frankly stuck in my craw. And I just looked at that and said, now that I know these facts, I mean, how is nobody doing anything about it, or nobody, you know, devoting a great deal of time and
Right.
resources to it?
It's almost like they're forgotten. They're like invisible people. Um,
Well, that's one way to look at it, but I think there's another way to look at it, which is we have so many preconceived notions about who these
mhm.
victims are. We again, we think that they're immoral, that they're just out to make a buck, things like that. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, and I hadn't planned on sharing this story, but I'm gonna share it real quick because I know she won't mind. But back in the day, I used to own a staffing company, and I met a wonderful person who her name's Clayton. She's kinda good friend of mine. She and I partnered together, and we helped get a couple of sex workers out of that line of work in Dallas, and because I had a staffing company, helped get them jobs, got them the clothes they needed, got them some skills, and now one of them, actually, Lori, became and worked for us. And I will say, I will never forget her telling me about the things that happened in her childhood that led her to where she was, and how she wound up with a pimp, how she wound up on the street. And that was the first time in my privileged world that I realized they weren't out just for money. They were not out there doing all the things I had thought and how I was raised to think. And I
Exactly, and
now think
you
there's a
were
lot of people
enlightened.
that way.
Well, you were enlightened, and there's sadly so many people in American society who don't know that, and just take the images we see on television or in popular culture and think that's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Now, how did you navigate the risk and challenges? Because you investigated this is a dangerous as well as complex subject and, issue. How did you navigate the risk and challenges of investigating this?
Well, excuse me. I was very blessed to have people I was working with and continue to work with, um, who knew many of the principles involved, who knew um, the issue intimately, and were able to advise me, when something I was doing was potentially risky, and I was able to, assess those risks with their help and analyze it, and make decisions accordingly.
Now, what role do you think Las Vegas plays in the story? Because I think it happens a lot more places. It's not just Vegas, especially after reading your book and the way things kind of move around. But how do you think Vegas became such a hub of that type of industry?
Well, I think it became a hub for a number of reasons. It is a community that revels in sinful behavior, and of course, we often associate sinful behavior with sexual practices. You already mentioned that Nevada does have parts of it where
Mhm.
sex work is legal under limited conditions. Again, Vegas is not one of those places, but
Right.
it's close enough that um, people who might want to engage in that behavior, um, they most likely are staying at a casino or at a resort, and the people at the resort and that work there, don't want them to leave, don't want them to go an hour to Pahrump. They
Right.
want them to stay there. So there's not an incentive to really correct them if they do believe that sex work is legal in Vegas. Or on the other hand, it gives them an incentive to sort of turn a blind eye for activity that might raise a red flag in the mind of someone else and under different circumstances. And then finally, I think the third major reason is simply, Vegas is a huge tourist attraction, and there's
Mhm.
a lot of money to be made here from the people who come.
I will never forget when we were moving to Vegas, and we went to look at houses, and we took both of our boys. One was going into middle school, one was going into high school, so we took them down to the Strip during the day. I will never forget the guy standing there flipping those cards with pictures of women on them, and he handed one to my middle school kid, and we hadn't even moved there yet, and I took him out of his hand, and I dropped him on the ground. I said, "Not my kid." And you're right. It happens there. I'm assuming it still happens there. I've been gone 9, 10 years now. I'm guessing that still happens, but they're handing out those cards for escorts.
Yeah, that's correct. I haven't seen the cards in quite some time. I believe that
Oh, good.
that practice is no longer
Okay,
going
good.
on. I don't know that it's not happening everywhere. It's certainly not as pervasive as it once
Okay,
was.
good.
But I can't tell you if it's definitely not happening anywhere. I can't say that. But yes, I mean, there's certainly still ads for um, well, there's billboards
Right.
for strip clubs, and there's certainly a lot of activity. Uh, in cyberspace on these topics.
Yeah. Now, do you think that because Vegas, when it rebranded itself many, many years ago from being the fun family place to the tagline, "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas," do you think that made it more enticing for because I'll remember when they went from getting people to go to Circus Circus before I'd ever been to Vegas, when they flipped to saying what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, my first thought was, "That's where all the naughty people go."
I mean, it certainly puts you in a certain frame of mind, doesn't it, about what you come to Vegas to do and what's available to you. Um,
Yeah,
I haven't done any sociological studies to tell
right.
you how things have specifically changed, but I think it's reasonable to at least think that that branding and that framing had an impact.
Yeah, wow. tourism committee, I'm gonna just go out on the limb and say, I think it had something to do with it, and I know a couple of people that work in that group now, so I'll be nice. But can you tell us how the hip hop industry intersected with the trafficking and corruption that you uncovered when you were doing your research?
Certainly. So the main sorry, the main intersection is the primary trafficker looked at in the book is also a hip hop music producer, and so that was sort of the primary entryway into looking at hip hop. What we also did in the book is we use that connection as a way to look at how hip hop talks about pimping and pimps. And
Right,
what we found is that hip hop often uses the term pimp to refer to uh, you know a flashy person or
mhm,
a super lover. Pimping can be referred to as having a lot of style, and
right,
so I want to be very clear, however, that I don't believe that that hip hop is to blame for sex
right.
trafficking, or that
Oh,
there is that there's anything essential in
right.
hip hop that connects it with sex trafficking. You can have there are wonderful uh, artists and wonderful
Oh,
albums and wonderful songs that have nothing
absolutely.
to do with this, and I don't want to ever
Oh,
give
absolutely.
give the impression that there's some sort of intrinsic connection or there's something
Right.
essential or that hip hop is to blame. I don't believe that at all. That being said, though, um, it is common. I think it's fair to say that in hip hop, the term pimp is used in a way that doesn't exactly describe it when we're talking about a trafficker, and
Mhm.
that sort of soft pedaling of that term can potentially have some corrosive effects on people who might not be educated on this issue. If you're perhaps a young woman who's heard on the radio the term pimp several times, and then you meet someone who says, "I am a pimp," that
Mhm.
might not raise red flags for that young woman
Right.
when pimps are scary individuals, and anyone that takes on that moniker, um, you should be wary of.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the '80s, I mean, this is kind of a funny story, but when I was in middle school, right before going to high school, my dad was working, a job, and he was in New Orleans. So, there was the company put him up, he was in the oil industry, and we were down on Bourbon Street, so we had a balcony to his apartment, and I remember looking at my mom, and I said, "I want to be one of those ladies that's wearing those feather things and those high heels with the beautiful makeup and sparkly things." And I will never forget, my dad goes, "Well, look at the guy behind her who's watching everything she does and is telling her what to do, when to do." But I just thought it was glamorous until, thankfully, my dad said, "That's a pimp, and if you ever have someone say, 'I'm a pimp,'" he goes, "you run as fast as you can and you scream for help." And I don't think a lot of people ever know that. It's just because it's glamorized.
It absolutely is. It sadly, uh, popular culture often plays often plays pimps for laughs, or
Mhm.
alternatively, the term is soft pedaled to mean cool or smooth, something like that, and that's just not what it
Yeah.
truly is.
Now, in your book, you share the story of Angela, who, I mean, she was prominent throughout your book. And she was a survivor who endured exploitation under, a notorious pimp and hip hop producer. And I think it's Mally Mall. Is that how you say
Molly
his
Mall is
name?
how you say his name.
Mally
Yes.
Mall. First thing I have to say about her before we get any further, the fact that she spoke up and talked to you, and reading your book, my heart, I felt for her story. And I think the courage it took for her to tell her story. So I think it's just amazing. So I want to
If
know
I
if
may
you
say
can. Yeah.
if I may say so, Angela is the most courageous person I've ever met, and is a true is a true hero for stepping up and being willing to put herself and her story out there.
Yeah, because it couldn't be easy. I mean, I'm sure she was scared that somebody was gonna come after her. Sh Didn't want her to talk, didn't want any of that. So, I mean, she's very courageous. Now, can you share her background and some of the circumstances that led her to Molly Mall's control?
Well, I mean, the book goes into more details about
Maybe,
her.
like, highlight it. Yeah, don't give away all the good stuff of the book.
Well, she grew up in a lower income part of Houston. Her father wasn't around very much. Her mother was absent quite a bit as well, and she spent a lot of time in the care of sitters, and you know grew up feeling very rejected
Mhm.
and unloved, and and she was I think I hate talking for her,
Right.
but I think she sought out the affections of adults and sought out validation from them.
And very common. I mean, a lot of people. One thing that I was surprised and I wanted to talk a little bit about is the methods that pimps in general, I think it not just him, but that they employ to recruit and entrap people. Because that was eye-opening to me. I That was shocking, to be honest. I had to go back and read it a couple of times. I was like, "They actually do this to suck people in."
Yes, that what you're describing falls under the general category of something that's known as grooming, and it can take many different forms. But generally, what it can involve is a pimp, a trafficker, cozying up to a potential uh, victim, and you know, showering them with attention, showering them with gifts, making them promises, um, things of that nature. That's sort of the early stages, and then once sort of the hook is planted, then grooming can then take some different forms from there. But that generally and very broadly describes what grooming can look like. I want to be clear that it's very easy to talk about these issues in sort of
Mhm,
uh, theoretical terms, but every victim's circumstances can be different, and indeed are different. And so it's really important when we talk about these issues to understand them on an individual's basis. It's very similar uh, for situations when we talk about spousal abuse.
mhm,
We can talk about spousal abuse in sort of broad terms, but I think we all intrinsically understand that every person's marriage is a little bit different, and it's
mhm.
important for us to understand them on an individual basis. It's the same is true for trafficking victims and survivors and their trafficking experiences. We can talk about them broadly. We can talk about the characteristics of what grooming looks like, things of that nature. But it's really important to understand the specifics of those cases and handle those specific cases on a case by case basis.
See, I had always put grooming with people who groom, like, pedophiles, things like that, who groom kids to grow up and do things until I read your book and read about I called it recruiting, but you're right, it's grooming. They kinda use the same playbook. It's different, but the same playbook. They found what that person wanted and needed and craved kinda and gave it to them.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, um, pimps would say, if all it takes is to find what somebody wants, and once you know that, you can use that to your advantage to exploit someone.
Yeah. Now, in your book, you go into detail, so I don't wanna go into a lot of it, but just overall, a quick way, how would you describe Angela's daily life while
Uh,
she was being
during her
trafficked?
during her trafficking experience,
During trafficking.
uh, again, I don't I don't I'm hesitant to
Okay.
speak for her, but uh, I would say the book describes. that she was, very isolated and very much
Mhm.
expected to either be preparing to work or working. That was really sort of the only two states that she was allowed to be in. Uh, she would make uh, large sums of money, um, but not be able to hold on to it. That would go to her trafficker, and she was expected to have multiple encounters with Johns, on a daily basis.
See, I don't know why that you would think I would have known this, but I didn't realize I had this misconception that if you had a pimp, that meant you got more of the money, like it was like a 50-50 partnership. Reading your book, I learned no, it was trafficking. I had until I read your book, I had never put pimp with traffickers. I had never brought that 2 together. I had thought traffickers was somebody who gets kidnapped off the street and brought into the sex trade.
Sadly, that is what I think a lot of people think, uh, and I think that's the case for a number of reasons. Um, in part because pimps have been a pop cultural phenomenon before we understood what trafficking was. Uh, but not, I should be clear, pimps are traffickers.
Mhm.
Pimps are
They are.
not looking to pimp,
Yeah,
pimps are not looking to have partnerships with anybody. They are looking to make money off of someone.
yeah. Like I said, once again, I learned I was very naive. Um, Now, what factors do you think contributed to Angela's decision to get away from Mally?
To get away from, from uh,
Or just from the
Molly's well, Molly specifically, Molly started to get some law enforcement heat, and so that drew her away from his network. But she remained in
I was like,
that
say she went
lifestyle,
yeah.
uh, and got hooked up with another pimp who brutally beat her, and it was that beating that led her to leave the life.
Okay. So, see, and this is why I'm reading it a 3rd time because I think I had the 2 I'm gonna just call them jerks. The 2 jerks flipped. I was thinking the other one was the one who had the legal heat and she flipped to Molly. I was thinking he was the one who did the brutal beating, so I had them backwards. So, yeah. How do you think she was able to get the courage to leave? Because reading her story, I don't know if I had been beaten down that much and had been through that for so long, how you dig deep inside and find that courage. What do you think that was, or did she mention to you what it was that gave her that?
Well, I think oftentimes when we are put in really dire circumstances, it's a chance to um, reflect on our lives. And certainly, Angela is a deep thinker, and as we've discussed, quite an amazing individual. And I think those two factors, I think her leaving the life can be explained in part by her own uh, strong spirit colliding with a dire circumstance. I'm sure there were other factors as well, but again, I don't want to speak for her,
Right.
but that's my that would be my read of the situation.
Now, can you shed light on law enforcement and how law enforcement in Las Vegas handled trafficking, pimps, the sex industry?
Well, so we've talked a lot about Angela,
Mhm.
and Angela is certainly the primary subject of the book, but close behind her is another subject that is very vital to the book, and that's Don Hoyer, and he's
Mhm.
a retired vice sergeant, and he's someone that I spent a long time with and got to know very well. First in my time at the newspaper, and then subsequently working on the book. And he was able to really enlighten me about how law enforcement approaches this issue.
Mhm.
And the first thing I would say when we talk about law enforcement and the way they address sex trafficking I apologize, is that there, really are two flavors of people in law enforcement: people who know this issue and people who don't. Um, and it's really important to to start off with that sort of differentiation. Uh, my impression in working with Don is that he worked on the Vice team in Las Vegas, and the people on his team that he worked with were largely very knowledgeable about this issue and very compassionate about this issue, because they had studied it, because they had interacted with people who survivors, things of that nature. On the other hand, you know, police departments are large organizations, big bureaucracies, and there are people in those bureaucracies that aren't as educated on this topic as the people who specialize in it. And particularly when you're in a community like Vegas, where sex trafficking is so rampant, it happens, so frequently, particularly on the strip. You know,
Mhm.
law enforcement officers can come in contact with this subculture, frequently, but won't be as educated on this topic in the way that the that the trained vice officers are, and that can have some detrimental impacts in terms of uh, if victims are not treated appropriately, that can make them
Mhm.
hesitant to work with police when they are ready to leave the life and perhaps come out against their pimp.
I mean, yeah, and wasn't sure how to pronounce his last name, and I talked to producer Tara about it, but Don, he he was just I mean, he was like a hero to me with reading, everything he tried to do, and I mean, everybody needs to read it because I could probably ask 1,000 questions about him and about everything he saw there, but I wanna know, how do you think law enforcement deals with, and even, Don, the ethical and the moral dilemma presented in law enforcement? Here you wanna have empathy and compassion for them, but yet they're breaking the law. How how do you think he and his team was able to do that?
Well, it is difficult, and I think it can be very very hard at times. What's important to understand is that um, it's very difficult to build cases against traffickers, and that's because uh, typically juries only expect or expect victims to testify against their pimps. As you might imagine, many victims are afraid to do so.
Mhm,
The only other way to build a case against a pimp is through circumstantial evidence. And a critical portion of circumstantial evidence against a pimp is their associations with known prostitutes. The only way that you can establish that someone is a known prostitute is by police picking them up and arresting them. Now, of course, that sounds horrifying. The
mhm,
notion that someone that we know is a victim is being arrested,
right,
and that's something that I struggled with understanding. And this is Don's perspective on this: that arrests handled appropriately, handled with respect and compassion, do two things. The first is that they begin to open up a relationship, a back and forth with police that maybe someday can flower into a stronger relationship where the victim feels comfortable coming to that officer and saying, I'm ready to get out of this lifestyle. Let me tell you about the pimp that I've been working for. That's one component of what a compassionately handled arrest can look like. The other component, again, from Don's perspective, is that arrests, even if they're like maybe for a day
mhm,
or not substantially long, but
right,
longer than just a passing through uh,
right,
the station, gives gives the victim some time away from their pimp, and that time
mhm,
away is valuable because the victim doesn't have the pimp in their ear, filling them up with manipulation, with brainwashing, and it gives them time to think about the
Think.
situation that they're in. And that space can begin to break the invisible chains that pimps have on on the women they're exploiting.
I found similarities to that in domestic violence victims because they'll arrest, the husband or that significant other. It gives that person time to be away from them and to think as well. Now, something that just struck my mind, did the pimps or did you run across where they victimized the person because they got arrested? Did they see that it was their fault? And
Well, I would say that it's not unusual, as
okay.
I understand it, for pimps to say to a woman in their stable after they've come out of an arrest situation that you have more money to make now
Oh,
because
makeup for
you were locked up, or maybe you have bills to pay, legal fees, things of that nature. So pimps can uh, you know pressure women after an arrest to make more money.
sorry, my dogs just decided to go crazy in the background.
That's okay.
Um, but so they just wanted them to make up the money. I don't know why it just hit my brain that my thought was, "Ooh, did they tell on me?" That was my first thought. Or are they turning evidence on me? I guess they didn't think of that. They just
Well, I
wanted
would
to.
say I'm like your dogs here. I would say that pimps are master manipulators, and um, many of them feel very confident that they have sufficiently brainwashed the uh, people that they are exploiting to not speak about them at all. So I don't
Makes
know
sense.
that would be their first concern. Although it could be. I
Yeah,
think, given that they tend to be pretty uh, financially driven,
I was say they're
that,
all about
that
money.
their first concern is going to be, you weren't working for X number of hours or days.
Right.
We need to
So
make
you
up.
owe me that. Now, when you were investigating this, did you face any legal intimidation or anything from people, any pimps or people in that world?
Um, Nothing overt, nothing
Okay.
that I can speak to. You can never truly understand what people mean by things that they say or write to you. Um, but I never I never directly felt threatened. No.
Okay. But innuendos, I mean, they happen. We see that happen in some things, but and you
I mean,
never know.
well, and you don't know, and I think that's
You
the
could be reading into it or you could just be
exactly.
dramatizing it.
It's hard to know what people's uh, could mean by
Right.
you like you said, you could read it into something, and so I can't say that anything that made me
Okay.
directly feel threatened. No.
What to date has been the most surprising reaction to your book? I mean, whether it be from public who's read it or from like Angela or Dawn or people, that you wrote about in the book.
I've been very gratified that people have got it, that they've they've understood the intent of the book, which was to educate and to help people better understand the nuances and textures of this issue. I was, candidly, I was afraid that maybe people wouldn't grasp that, and maybe maybe grip more to the sensational aspects of the story, or
Mm.
dismiss it. I mean, I will say I did hear from someone I know who sort of dismissed the book and said, "Well, you know, women have had sex for benefits for years. I don't really understand the purpose of what you're talking about here." But I'm very very proud to say that that sort of dismissive response has been in the minority, severe minority.
Good.
Most people have I think understood this, approached it with the seriousness that it deserves, and have come away as you did with deep compassion for the trauma and victimization that people like Angela have endured.
Yeah, I mean, the re-victimization of those individuals is just I can't even put words to it. Now, talk about that. How can average people like me help identify because trafficking happens in more than just with pimps, but it can happen. I heard a story not too long ago that it was the woman's husband. They had been married. They got into a situation they needed money. He turned her out. And her neighbors didn't know she was still going to PTA. But what resources or how can the average people like me help identify that someone could possibly be in that situation?
It can be difficult, and it requires us to be aware of the people in our orbit and the things that they're doing. I mean, I think it can be very very difficult as it relates to strangers that you
Mhm.
might see on the street corner or walking through a mall or a casino to 100% know if someone is being trafficked or not. But we have a better chance of potentially identifying red flags for the people in our lives. And one way to do that is to look for. We have a section in the back of the book where
Mhm.
we talk about some red flags. You know, one potential red flag is someone showing up with luxury goods that they previously didn't have, and they haven't gotten a new job that you're aware of. That's one potential sign, because it could be a pimp
Right.
grooming that person, or already already started the the trafficking relationship, and sort of giving gifts to solidify that. Of course, um, bruises, signs of violence can be potentially signs of trafficking. Being on call, being at someone's beck and call, a particular person's beck and call at all hours of the day and night, is a potential sign. Not having access to critical personal identifying documents. It's sorry, it's very common for traffickers to take from their victims their birth certificates, their driver's licenses, things of that nature, so they can't uh, leave
Right.
their control. And so, if you know someone who doesn't have access to their own driver's license or their own birth certificate, that could be a red flag in the context of all these other things that we're talking about. It again, it's not like you see one thing. Okay, this person's being trafficked. You sort of have
Right.
to see all of these different things together.
Well, but talking about that, reading those red flags, taking documents, that also is a sign for domestic violence because of the control they take it. So, and we all the time on the show say, if you suspect something, don't worry about looking like a fool. I would rather look like a fool than be sorry later.
Absolutely, and I think another thing that we can all do is just simply um, be compassionate to the people in our lives, and to be you know to have real connection with them. It's very easy to sort of be at a surface level with everybody and
Right.
to not really engage with them. But I think it really can matter when we reach out to people and show them that we care.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, uh, victims of domestic sex trafficking feel isolated, feel alone, feel like no one else cares about them, and indeed feel like the only person who does care about them is their
Right.
trafficker. And if we as a society can become more compassionate, can become
Mhm.
uh, uh, more aware of each other, and more caring, more humane to each other, that can begin to undercut the manipulations of a trafficker.
I mean, in my thoughts, it would kinda cut them off at the knees if we show that compassion and we be there because the way I see it, they're grooming them so that they think they are the only people that care, and if other people would
Absolutely,
show that they care, you're kinda taking away their control and their power in
absolutely.
my vision.
No, you're absolutely correct, and I think um, one of the sad things about working on this book was how it made me so disappointed in our culture. We are a very isolated, siloed culture at this point. Uh, in 2025, we don't care about our neighbors. We don't care about the people we interact with.
Mm-mm.
Um, and I think that sort of disregard uh, leaves us all vulnerable to exploitation, whether it be sex trafficking or other kinds of exploitation.
It does. I mean, absolutely, and I think of thinking of Vegas, friends that I know go there, and I ask them, "What was your favorite part?" And to hear people tell me, "Oh, I love just sitting at the restaurants and watching the people go by and people watching." And after reading your book, I have a friend that just came back. I said, "Did you see anything that made you want to get up and say, 'Hey, do you need help? Do you need anything?'" And she was like, "No." And I was like, "Because you're just sitting there not watching." Because now that I think back to things that I saw there after reading your book, I was like, "Wow, I should have, but I didn't know." And from my point of view, I hope that's what people will get when they read your book is to start looking at things and get out of your own little world when you're out and look at what's happening right in front of you.
Absolutely. I mean, the uh, voyeuristic nature of
Mhm.
Vegas is
Yes.
desensitizing, and I think that desensitization plays right into the hands of traffickers.
It does. Well, I know we've been talking for quite a while. I know we've had some questions. Let me
Please.
see what we've got. So, if I can figure out how to see the questions, will be good. So, Lady in Gray says, "How prevalent are victims who are not runaways or kidnap victims and simply easy targets due to past trauma?"
That's a very difficult question to answer. Uh, I can tell you that kidnapped victims is not the most common thing that we're seeing here.
Mm-mm.
Um, Runaways and easy targets due to past trauma, in my mind, are the same thing,
Okay.
and that's going to be the more common thing as I understand it. Again, I want to clarify that this is obviously illegal activity. There's not like there's censuses being done of this,
Right.
so
It's hard to get data.
well, it's virtually impossible to get data, and so we're piecing this together as we go. And you might note that I do measure my words very carefully, and the reason why I do that is because there are people who are skeptical of sex trafficking, and
Mhm.
I don't want to give those people any ammunition um, to dismiss this plight on our society. So it's my belief that by speaking carefully and measuring my words carefully, that I am eliminating, or at least attempting to eliminate, any criticism as it relates to the legitimacy of this issue.
No, 'cause let's see. So, how has
Yeah,
social media affected trafficking? Oh,
hugely. That's a very astute question. Social media is a common tool that traffickers use to recruit victims, and social media has made it easier for pimps and other traffickers to find people to exploit. It used to be, in the before time, before the internet and social media, traffickers typically, as I understood it, only found their victims through personal contact. Now you
right.
can hop on the web, hop on Instagram, hop on Twitter, and find people that you can exploit. Much like other scams are exploiting us through social media and other forms of digital connection. Uh, it is a huge problem. It is something that our children are in danger of by being on the internet. Um, do they fear the tracking of it? Do traffickers fear the tracking of it? I haven't gotten that impression at all. My impression is that they are giddy about social media because it allows them to survey a larger
As they
population.
say, it opens up their prospect pool. Oh, the thought of that just gave me chills. That just, yeah. Mm. So, Lady in Gray said, "Did you find a lot of underage victims or are they largely late teens to 20s?
So my reporting for this book, uh, for the most part, focused on uh, victims who are of age.
Of
I
age?
have the book does mention some previous reporting I did for the paper on
Mhm.
uh, on under. I got to choose my words carefully. People underage who engage in prostitution are being trafficked. Um, it is uh, it is horrifying to
Yeah.
see children, people who are
Mhm.
unable to consent to sexual
Right.
behavior being exploited in this way, and it is sadly you know much more common than I think people realize.
Yeah, and that's the scary thing. I agree. I think it's way more common than any of us really want to think, because that's hard to think. Now, I have to ask because as a person, who wants to, become a PI, I know there's people out there who want to become investigative journalists. Do you have any tips, advice, or would you tell them don't do it?
Investigative reporting is, in my opinion, the most gratifying and meaningful work that you can do. Uh, I will separate, however, the work from the business. And the business of journalism, of course, is struggling mightily right now. Um, there, it's very hard to do long term investigative work and support your family. And so, uh, if you have deep pockets, I'd say go for it. If you don't, I would recommend um, you know, doing this in conjunction with something else that pays the bills.
And do you think that's because we've become an instant society? We think DNA testing, you take the DNA, you've got it tomorrow because, CSI. Investigative journalism to investigate, take the time, talk to sources, do the work. It's a lot of work, a lot of hours, days, weeks, months, years, and you don't get paid till you're done at the end, right?
Well,
So do you
in books that's certainly the case. I mean, in news organizations, you'll have a salary, but news organizations are squeezed right now, and it's very difficult to justify for a news organization to have on staff a reporter who hasn't had anything in the paper for 6 months or a year. I mean, that's very hard to justify when the profit margins are down as much as they are, and they're under so much pressure, especially when you consider the kind of resources that investigative reporting can require. You
Mhm.
know, in documents that can cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
travel, other things of that nature. It becomes a lot harder to justify for news organizations, what I would call true investigative reporting. Well,
Yes,
maybe not
you're
true isn't the right, maybe that's not the right word. There can be true investigative reporting that's more short term, but really
right.
deep, long investigative reporting, it's harder and harder to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we're in a virtual society, but there is still something about traveling somewhere and talking to somebody face to face. You'll get more information. I mean, it's just different.
I would absolutely argue that it's very difficult to do this kind of work and not have at least some face to face contact.
Yeah. Now, what's next for you? Are you working on another book? Are you
That's a great question. The honest answer is that I don't know. I
okay?
love journalism. I would love to continue doing journalism. This has been a very hard road for me and my family, and we've we you know largely funded this project out of our own pocket. Um, so I'm freelancing right now, trying to look around for what's next for myself. I don't know. I would love to find some sort of situation, whether it be a newsroom or a university setting where I could teach and do freelance journalism, where I would feel comfortable and feel like I fit. I don't know. Do I have a lot of stories that I would like to tell um, in this as it relates to trafficking, as it relates to justice issues. as it relates to other issues in general. Um, it's the reality of the marketplace today is, I don't know what's next. It really is going to depend on what opportunities I can find.
Wow.
But to directly
Yeah.
answer your question, yes, I would love to continue reporting on this issue. I have lots of ideas about it, and I would, if there's some, you know, patron out there that would like to, see that happen, that would be wonderful.
If we have any multi-billionaires out there who just have money to spend, I mean, because I do think I think sex trafficking is just going to get worse as technology continues to grow. I think it's going to get worse. Now, but I think you did a great job writing this book. So have you ever thought of writing fiction with some of your stories?
I do have an idea for a fictionalized television series that would address some issues for sex trafficking. Candidly, that's a new world for me, and
Yeah.
I am still, kind of learning about what that might involve.
Well, and also if anyone knows anybody from Law& and Order, I mean, SVU, all I could think about is I could hear Olivia Benson in my head. I mean, I think you need to write a script or 2 for them. So, if anybody
you know,
knows them personally.
it's funny that you say that. I believe that the mark of a truly influential piece of journalism on criminal justice issues is when it appears in some form in a Law and Order episode.
I mean, because people watch it. I mean, that's how I wound up in true crime. My mom got me into Law& and Order many, many years ago, and look at me today. Well, I wanna thank you so much for joining us tonight, and for sharing, your insight. I want to tell everybody, yes, anybody who watches this knows I'm a big reader. I set a goal every year of how many books to read. This year, my goal, I had to back it down a little bit, but my goal this year is 350 books. And I can do that if I don't read books 2 or 3 times.
Oh man, I'm causing you problems. I'm sorry.
But no, it's good because I am learning so much, and it's good because I also wanna get my PI license. Sex trafficking would be part of that kinda work, so it's been great. But like I said, it was eye-opening, and I also like that it brings awareness to something, and I'm hoping it will educate people to turn the light bulb on for even me who knew stuff about prostitution because of my previous world. I never associated prostitution with sex trafficking until your book. So I thank you for turning that light bulb on for me because I still didn't until now. I have a better understanding of it. So I personally say thank you for it and appreciate your courage.
I thank you for that, but really the people who deserve all the credit of this are Angela and Don.
Oh,
Uh, their courage for speaking
mhm,
out when so many people in their situation uh, would have chosen a different path.
mhm.
It's because of them that this book was able to be completed, and any success that this book has is a credit to them.
Yeah, but also thank you to your family because even with just a podcast, I mean, families give up a lot for people to do these kind of things. I know my family does for me to do investigative work that I do on a missing person case. So also thanks to them because like you said, it takes a toll on the family.
It does, and I am deeply grateful to my wife and to my parents for their support of this project.
Yeah. And I just want to tell everybody, go out and grab it. Trust me, you will be glad you did. And I love that you gave resources in the back. I love the term, you give the glossary of what things mean. I mean, you truly did all of that stuff because I read some books and I have to keep Google up so I can go Google to see what something means. I appreciated you going that extra step so I didn't have to do that.
I thought it was really important to publish as much of what we learned, because this is such a misunderstood area of
Mhm.
our society, and frankly, I just haven't found any succinct one-stop shop for all these different ideas. And so I don't know that there'll ever be one-stop shop, but we tried to at least create a place for people to begin to understand this issue in a deep and textured way.
Yeah, well, like I said, thank you, and if you still keep in touch with Angela, I mean, just please tell
We still
her,
talk all the time.
okay,
Absolutely.
the
I mean,
courage that I mean, she is somebody that I would just wanna meet and give a hug to and just I I don't know, I just what she has come through and where she's at today just makes me say, "You can truly overcome anything."
absolutely, she is an inspiration to us all, and I'm fond of saying that she is the heart of Vegas Concierge. But Don, is the
God
conscience,
was
and he is also an equally courageous individual and an amazing individual as well.
He is, I mean, because I mean, like I said, I don't wanna give too much away because I want people to go and read the book, and I've been told before when we interview authors, they're like, "Well, we didn't need to read the book, you got it all." No, we're not giving you all the answers this time, but I do wanna say thank you. I wanna say thank you to people who are watching, people who watch later. Remember to like, this video. I am also going to ask you to share the link for the website that we put up in the chat. It's also in the description of the live stream. We need more people to read Vegas Concierge so they can get educated. So I want people to think about it as I learned the most amazing thing today and I want to share it with others because the more people who read it, we can maybe make an impact and make a difference because it's not happening in just Vegas. It's happening everywhere. So that is what I'm going to ask people to do. So don't just share, the thought about it, but I want you to actually go out and share it. It's a hard topic to talk about, but it's a topic that we need to talk about. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone that watched. And real quick, don't forget JT and I have an in-person live show at Hamilton Pool Vineyards and Farms in May here in Dripping Springs, Texas. I shouldn't say here because I'm in Austin, but we'll be covering the Austin yogurt shop murders. And it's a case that will make your head spin. So definitely if you're in the area, you want to purchase tickets. Next week on True Crime and Wine Time, we are covering a case that is still haunting me, and I might slap JT for bringing it to our attention and saying we needed to do it. It's When the Axeman Comes, a New Orleans Nightmare. Guys, do we need to make New Orleans any more haunting? Okay, but we're going to. Also, if you have any cases, authors, books that you've read about subjects that you think are of interest to us and our audience, please email Tara at tcwtmedia.com because we want to look into it, bring it on the show. And as we sign off, always, guys, please stay safe and speak up. If you see something, don't be worried about making a fool of yourself. Just speak up. And as you know me, enjoy your wine time. So until next time, guys, see you soon. And we're going to see if it works this time and not kills us all.